Chapter 4.2, Posting Separate Amounts to a General Ledger. Once again, in Chapter 4, we are taking the information that we recorded from a journal, and we are going to be moving it over to a general ledger. And the reason why we move it over to the general ledger, it allows us to organize it and be more efficient and know exactly what our balances are and what we owe. Before we get started, though, we want to talk a little bit about the relationship of a T account to a ledger. From up until now, we've been doing a lot of T accounts, and we've been able to look at balances and whatnot. All the ledger is a more in-depth form than the T account. That kind of spells it out a little better. And the reason being is a T account will tell us the date, will tell us where we got it from the transaction and what happened. And it gives us that information needed to trace the entry back to the journal page. We then put the T account in there, and then we have a balance on there as well, and that's our debit and balance. One key thing that a lot of students sometimes mix up on is when you're posting to a ledger. When you're posting to a ledger, students think that their debits have to equal their credits. Not when you post to a ledger. This is a way to keep track. So you might have only debits on there. You might have only credits on there, and that's okay only in a ledger. In a journal, your debits must equal your credit. So let's take a look at this little transaction here. We want to post the separate amounts of the general debit and column. So for right now, what we're going to do is we're not going to worry about that sales credit, cash debit, or cash credit special amount columns. We will take care of those later. That actually comes in the next lesson. But for now, we're going to focus just on posting the individual amounts in the general debit and general credit column. So if we take a look at that first transaction in the journal, it's Alto Comoco Capital. It's R1, and it happened on October 1st, and it has a credit of $3,000, which means he invested $3,000 on October 1st. Well, what we have to do is we're going to have to actually start the journal page. So in starting the journal page, start the ledger page, what we're going to do is we need to put the account title on there. Well, the account title is actually going to be Alto Comoco Capital, and our account number, which we got from last lesson when we prepared our chart of accounts, is 310. You can reference back to your chart of accounts given for you for any problem, but it is 310. Now, let's record the entry into the ledger. So, real simple, we just move left to right. What is the date of the transaction? It was October 1st. And where are we getting this information from? We're getting it from page 1 of the journal page, so we're going to move that over to our post reference column. Now in there, Alto Comoco Capital, it is entered as a credit entry, so it's going to be a credit entry into the ledger for $3,000. So if it's a credit in the journal, it's a credit in the ledger. If it's a debit entry in the ledger, it's a debit entry in the journal. So they stay the same. Then what we have to do is we have to figure out the balance. Well, if we have nothing, zero, and we have a $3,000 credit, that's going to give us a $3,000 balance as a credit. And it should, because Alto Comoco Capital is, when they invest money, it increases owner's equity, so it should have that credit balance, as we learned earlier this year. Now we have one last step to do, is we want to go and kind of put our bookmark in that journal to show that we have done that. So we're going to take that account number 310 and we're going to go back and we're going to put it into that post reference column. And now we have successfully individually posted our Alto Comoco Capital to its ledger, and we have checked it off as our post reference. So let's move on to the next, another asset account. This would be our asset account, prepaid insurance. Once again, we're going to open the account with prepaid insurance. We're going to give it the account title 150, which we found earlier when we prepared our chart of accounts. And now we're just going to transfer the information straight down from the journal to the ledger. October 4 was the transaction date. We're going to put that in there. We were getting this information from the journal page 1, so we're going to put 1. And in here you can see that the prepaid insurance was a debit, so we bought some prepaid insurance, so it's going to be a debit in the ledger. And we have a zero balance with a $200 debit, therefore our balance is going to be a $200 debit. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to take our account number and we're going to move it to the post reference for 150, and then that way we know that we have successfully completed that. Next, we're going to take a look at our supplies, and once again we're going to open our supplies account, and my transitions aren't working well, but you get the point. We will put our supplies there. We have our account number is 140 from our chart of accounts. The transaction happened on October 10th. We got it from journal page 1. It is a debit in the general amount column. So therefore it's going to be a debit in the general ledger. Therefore 0 plus a balance of 110 is going to be a debit balance of 110. And then finally we put our 140 up there. Now then we'll continue on. We have our accounts payable Baybridge, so we'll do the same thing with that one. And like I said, it's very similar. Our accounts title is accounts payable Baybridge. The account number is 210. The transaction happened on October 10th, and the credit was 110. 0 plus a credit balance will give us a credit balance of 110 in there. And then finally we put our 210 back up into the post-reference column to know that we have successfully completed it. Now, when you're all finished, you're going to see it'll look like this with the journal. Now remember when we talked about those check marks in the previous chapter? Those check marks, if you remember, represent that they are not posted individually. So basically those will get posted, but they're going to get posted as a total. So just kind of keep in mind. So if you see a check mark there, you don't have to do it. Remember, the first part in posting is to post the individual amounts in the general and debit column. Those check marks mean that you don't have to post those individually. Those will be posted as totals later. So in the brought forward, carried forward, and the totals, those will be posted later. One mistake that a lot of students make, and I really want to warn on this, is they like to sit there and they like to just go down and bulk fill. And they haven't entered it because they want to be more efficient. They want to take this information and they want to just enter the post-reference column right away because they know it, but yet they haven't done the ledger. Do not make that mistake. It will be extremely difficult, and the main reason being is if you stop, how do you know where you're going to start or how to start? So do not make this mistake, but rather always follow these steps. And it is write the date of the transaction, which is October 31st. We're going to do the Alto Comoco Capital again. Write the journal page number, which is page 1, which is what we got. Write the debit and credit amount. In this case, we're doing the drawing account. In this case, it is a debit. And then write the new account balance. And then, and only then, do you go back to the ledger and write the account number of 320. Make sure you follow these steps. If you don't, you'll make it much more work than you need to be, and you will absolutely not like it all. Let's just kind of take real quick here. I want to show you one more thing before we get going. Once again, we're going to cover up the sales credit and cash debit. But what happens when, let's say, people buy something on account and pay for something on account, and what happens to their ledger? So I'm skipping around, and just for demonstration purposes, you should not skip around. But we have this accounts payable Baybridge. The transaction happened on the 10th. The post references comes from page 1. The credit is 110. Our new balance is 110. Okay, we then go up and we put 210 in the post reference, continuing the steps. Okay, by the magic of TV, we posted the next one, which is accounts receivable Melanie Ford, October 15th, post reference 1. It has a debit balance of 55, and our debit entry of 55 and a debit balance of 55 as well. We go back up, we put 120 there. I then am doing my process. I post advertising expense individually, and now our next transaction is accounts payable Baybridge, and this transaction is telling us that we paid Baybridge what we owed them. Well, let's take a look what happens in the transaction. We're going to put the date down there. Post reference is page 1. You're going to see it's a debit entry. Now we have a little interesting situation. We have a credit balance with a debit entry. They're different. If they are different, you have to remember that you need to find the differences. So we are going to actually subtract, and we'll subtract 110 from 80. Now, when we subtract that, we also need to look at which one is bigger. Well, the credit balance is bigger than the debit entry, so therefore it's going to be a credit balance, which is where the answer will go, and it's a credit balance of 30. Then take our thing and we'll put it into 10. If we take a look at the next one, we got Melanie Ford. Now Melanie Ford presents us an interesting situation as well. Melanie Ford, if you look on the 27th, she paid us the money, but Melanie Ford paid us $20 more than what she needed to. So someone in their accounting department doesn't really know what's going on. And this does happen, and I think it's good to know. But once again, we have a debit balance with a credit entry. They are different, so we are going to find the differences. And since we're going to find the differences, we need to figure out, okay, we know it's a $20 difference between them. Which number is bigger? Is the credit balance bigger or the debit the credit entry bigger or the debit balance? Well, the credit entry is bigger, so therefore the balance is going to be $20. And what that story is telling us is that, look, we need Melanie Ford overpaid us. We have to write her a check back or whatnot to say, hey, you know what? You paid us too much. Here's your money back. And that is what happens. Now, if, let's say, Melanie Ford bought more on an account, and let's say that credit was a $75 debit, then the balance would remain on the debit side of $130. So that's how you record the transactions and record individual amounts from special amount columns. Hope this helps, and we wish you